Ancient China, 184 AD. The Han dynasty, once a beacon of civilization for 400 years, is dying. It is not dying from an outside enemy, but from a cancer within. Corruption has rotted the foundation. In the halls of Luoyang, corrupt eunuchs whisper into the ears of weak emperors, selling offices to the highest bidder. Outside the palace walls, the peasantry starves. Nature itself seems to rebel, with floods and locusts ravaging the plains. From this misery, a spark ignites. A mystic named Jiang Ju claims the mandate of heaven has passed. He leads millions in yellow headbands in a holy war. The Yellow Turban Rebellion is not just a riot, it is a tidal wave. The rebellion threatens to swallow the Han. In desperation, the court forces the Han to do the unthinkable: arm the warlords. This decision saves the empire but kills the dynasty. Among the soldiers sent to crush them is the ambitious Cao Cao, joined by the noble-hearted Liu Bei, who fought not for power, but for the people he loved. But as the rebellion falls, a new monster emerges from the western frontier, the tyrant Dong Zhuo. Invited to restore order, he instead brings chaos. He deposes the emperor and murders his rivals. He burns the capital to the ground, moving the court to Chang'an. His reign is a nightmare of blood and fire. But tyranny breeds resistance. A coalition of 18 warlords rises, led by the noble Yuan Shao. Yet, this alliance is a house of cards. They collapse not from Dong Zhuo's strength, but from their own greed. In the power vacuum, the Han vanishes. Every governor becomes a king. Every general becomes a warlord. The struggle begins. With the tyrant Dong Zhuo gone, two titans emerged to claim the north: the noble Yuan Shao and the cunning Cao Cao. Cao Cao was more than a soldier. He was a political genius. He escorted the emperor to his city of Shu, ruling in his name. He implemented the Tunqian system, using soldiers to farm waste land. While others starved, Cao Cao's armies were well fed. But in the north, Yuan Shao sat on a mountain of resources. In 200 AD, he marched south with 110,000 elite troops. Cao Cao met him at Guan with barely 20,000 men. On paper, it was a suicide mission. But war isn't won on paper. Yuan Shao built massive towers to rain arrows down. Cao Cao's men couldn't even raise their heads. He needed a miracle. He countered with thunder carriages, early catapults that smashed the towers into kindling. The stalemate began. The turning point wasn't a battle, but a betrayal. A strategist named Xu Yu defected, revealing Yuan Shao's secret supply depot at Wuchao. Cao Cao didn't hesitate. He led 5,000 elite cavalry himself, disguised as enemy troops, deep into the night. They burned it all. Millions of pounds of grain turned to ash in hours. Yuan Shao's army was now a starving giant. As dawn broke, Cao Cao launched his final assault. Disorganized and hungry, the northern army shattered. Yuan Shao fled with only 800 riders. Cao Cao was now the undisputed master of northern China. While Cao Cao conquered, Liu Bei was a man without a home, wandering the south, looking for a way to stop the rising tide. By 208 AD, Cao Cao turned his eyes to the south. He didn't want a kingdom, he wanted the world. The final piece of the puzzle lay across the Yangtze River. The true war was about to begin. While Cao Cao's shadow loomed, Liu Bei was told of a man who could change the fate of the world: the sleeping dragon. 3 times, in the freezing snow, Liu Bei climbed the mountain. He didn't come as a warlord, but as a humble seeker of wisdom. Finally, the dragon awoke. Zhuge Liang, a young genius of 26, saw through the chaos of the age. He presented the Longzhong plan. China must be divided into 3 to find balance. This was the birth of the 3 kingdoms. But Cao Cao's army was coming fast. Thousands of ships and nearly 200,000 men were descending on the south. To survive, Liu Bei needed an ally. He turned to Sun Quan, the young lord of the east, whose court was paralyzed by fear. Zhuge Liang didn't beg. He challenged Sun Quan's pride. If you can fight, fight. If not, surrender now. Sun Quan drew his sword and chopped the corner off his table. Anyone who speaks of surrender shall meet this fate. Cao Cao's fleet was a floating city. To stop the northern soldiers' seasickness, he chained his ships together. He felt invincible. He even wrote a poem on the eve of battle, believing the south would fall by morning. But the legend says Zhuge Liang knew a secret. He climbed a high altar to borrow the southeast wind. Under the cover of a fog, 20 fire ships filled with dry straw and oil drifted toward the massive, immovable targets. In an instant, the river became an inferno. Because the ships were chained, they couldn't escape. The fire spread like a plague. Cao Cao watched his dreams of unification burn in a single night. The master of the north was now a fugitive. The Battle of Red Cliffs was over. Cao Cao fled north, but for the first time, he was no longer alone in his power. The fires of Red Cliffs had barely cooled when a new war began. Not for an empire, but for a single province, Jing. To Liu Bei, Jing was the foundation of his promised kingdom. To Zhuge Liang, it was a grand chessboard. But to Sun Quan, it was the gateway to his security. He felt robbed of the fruits of his victory at Red Cliffs. While the Wu generals celebrated, Zhuge Liang quietly seized the strategic cities right from under their noses. This betrayal planted a seed of hatred in the heart of Wu's commander, Zhou Yu, that would never wither. Meanwhile, in the north, Cao Cao was not idle. He licked his wounds and turned his eyes toward the wild northwest. He crushed the fierce Ma clan to secure his rear, proving that the master of Wei was still the most dangerous man in China. The world was no longer a chaotic brawl. It was a cold, calculated game of 3 players. Liu Bei now turned his eyes westward, to the fertile lands of Shu, the final piece of Zhuge Liang's plan. As he marched to claim his destiny, he left his most trusted brother behind to guard the throat of the empire. Guan Yu, the god of war, stood watch over Jing province. His presence alone was enough to keep both Wei and Wu at bay. But to Wu, Jing was a stolen treasure. To Wei, it was a thorn in their side. Both were waiting for a moment of weakness. In 219, Guan Yu launched a massive offensive northward. He flooded the enemy's 7 armies, reaching the peak of his glory. But pride comes before a fall. While Guan Yu looked north, a secret pact was signed in the shadows between Wei and Wu. The white-robed soldiers of Wu were moving. The god of war was about to be stabbed in the back. The death of Guan Yu was not just the loss of a general, it was the death of an era. When his severed head was sent to Cao Cao, the master of Wei didn't celebrate. He buried it with the honors of a prince. Soon after, Cao Cao himself, the man who nearly unified China, followed his rival into the grave. The old lions were dead, leaving the world to their sons. In the north, Cao Pi ended the 400-year Han dynasty. In the west, a broken-hearted Liu Bei declared himself emperor, not for power, but to keep the Han flame alive. But grief had blinded the noble king. Ignoring Zhuge Liang's pleas, Liu Bei launched a massive, vengeful invasion of Wu. 700 miles of camps stretched along the Yangtze, a forest of white funeral banners for his fallen brother. But the young Wu commander Lu Xun was a patient fire starter. He waited for the summer heat to do his work. Liu Bei had made a tactical nightmare. Camps connected in a line through dry woods. Lu Xun saw his moment. In a single night at Yiling, the dream of the Han was set ablaze. The fire spread for miles in minutes. Liu Bei watched his army vanish in the flames. His revenge had cost him everything. He fled to Baidicheng, the White Emperor city. But he didn't die of a wound. He died of shame and sorrow. Liu Bei was gone. The world was fractured, and the dream of the Han now rested entirely on one man's shoulders. Zhuge Liang was alone, but he had a promise to keep. The northern expeditions were about to begin. Zhuge Liang did not seek war, he sought survival. He knew that for the tiny state of Shu to survive, it had to keep way off balance. Across the treacherous mountain paths, the wooden oxen and flowing horses, his mechanical wonders, carried the hopes of the Han. But in the north, a new wall had risen. Sima Yi, a man as patient as a stone, was waiting for the genius to burn out. Sima Yi knew he didn't need to defeat Zhuge Liang in battle. He only had to wait for time to kill him. The two played a grand game of chess across the border. Every move was a trap, every silence was a threat. When Zhuge Liang sent Sima Yi a woman's dress to mock his cowardice, the strategist wore it with a smile. He knew his enemy's health was failing. Zhuge Liang was working himself to death for a dying dream. At Jiting, the loss of a single mountain pass turned a brilliant victory into a desperate retreat. Yet, even in retreat, he was terrifying. He used the empty city stratagem, playing a zither while his gates stood wide open. Sima Yi, fearing a massive ambush inside the silent city, retreated. Zhuge Liang had won a battle with nothing but music. By 234 AD, on the Wujiang plains, his life flickered out like a candle in the wind. The dragon was dying. He gave his last orders, not for conquest, but to save his people. He prepared one final ghostly trick. As Sima Yi rushed to attack the retreating army, he saw something that stopped him cold. A figure in a carriage. It was a wooden statue of Zhuge Liang. Sima Yi, terrified the dragon was still alive, fled in panic once again. A dead Zhuge Liang had scared away a living Sima Yi. But with the dragon gone, the stage was set for a new, bloodier unification. Zhuge Liang was dead, but the war was far from over. In the north, Sima Yi was no longer just a general. He was a kingmaker. However, the Cao imperial family saw him as a threat. They wanted to strip the old fox of his fangs. Cao Shuang, a vain and arrogant regent, stripped Sima Yi of his power, forcing him into a sickly retirement. For 10 years, Sima Yi played the part of a dying man, fooling even the brightest spies with his performance. But in 249 AD, while the Cao clan was away at the gaping tombs, the dying man suddenly awoke. In a lightning-fast coup, Sima Yi seized the capital. The old fox had finally revealed his true fangs. He executed Cao Shuang and his entire clan, staining the streets with the blood of his rivals to secure his grip. The power of Wei was now the power of Sima. The imperial family were now nothing but puppets. In the south, the last flame of the Han still burned. Jiang Wei, the student of Zhuge Liang, was not ready to give up. He launched 9 desperate expeditions into the north. He fought with his teacher's brilliance, but without his resources. He was a lone hero in a falling world, chasing a dream that was already turning to ash. As the Sima brothers, Zhao and Shi, consolidated their iron grip, they prepared for the final, decisive blow. The three-way stalemate was ending. The era of the heroes was over. The era of the conquerors had begun. While Jiang Wei fought at the border, a secret path had been found through the mountains. The end was here. Shu Han, the dream of Liu Bei and Zhuge Liang, was no more. The world was one step closer to a new cold peace. With the fall of Shu, the 3 kingdoms were down to 2. But the heart of Wei was no longer beating for the Cao family. In 265 AD, Sima Yan, the grandson of Sima Yi, finally tore off the mask and claimed the throne. He forced the last Wei emperor to abdicate. The sun had set on the Han and the Wei. The era of Jin had begun. Now only one obstacle remained, the kingdom of Wu. But Wu was ruled by a tyrant named Sun Hao. He ruled with a cruelty that turned his own people against him. He was a man who mistook fear for loyalty. In 280 AD, Sima Yan launched a massive, six-pronged invasion. The final curtain was falling. Hundreds of thousands of Jin soldiers sailed down the river on giant floating fortresses, warships as large as cities. Wu's legendary river defenses, massive iron chains stretched across the Yangtze, stood in their way. But the Jin were prepared. They sent fire ships to melt the chains, turning the iron into liquid heat. The defenses were useless. As the Jin soldiers stormed the walls of Jianye, the end was finally in sight. Sun Hao surrendered without a fight. The last of the three kingdoms had fallen. After 60 years of blood and fire, the three kingdoms were finally won. China was whole again. But unification came with a heavy price. Millions had died for this peace, and the age of heroes was gone. The stories of Cao Cao, Liu Bei, and Sun Quan were moved to the scrolls of history, to be remembered forever. Thus ended the three kingdoms, a century of chaos that birthed a legend that will never die. The three kingdoms was more than a century of war. It was the crucible that forged the Chinese soul. For 1,800 years, the names of Cao Cao, Liu Bei, and Zhuge Liang have been more than names in a book. We see ourselves in Cao Cao's relentless ambition, the drive to master a world in chaos. In Liu Bei's unwavering kindness, the hope that humanity can be better than its worst instincts. And in Zhuge Liang's tragic devotion to a failing cause, the beauty of fighting for what is right, even if it is lost. Their stories traveled from the dry records of Chen Shou to the epic verses of the romance of the three kingdoms. Today their legacy lives on in every temple built for Guan Yu, and in every story told of their deeds. And in every strategy game played by millions, where we test our own brilliance against theirs. It taught us that the empire long divided must unite, long united must divide, a cycle that never ends. It is a reminder that while empires crumble and borders shift, the ideals of loyalty and courage are immortal. As we close the scrolls of this era, we realize the three kingdoms never truly ended. It simply became a part of us, an eternal story of how we fight, how we fail, and how we dream. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the ash and the gold of ancient China.